The Trudeau government has started a new war with Alberta by demanding that the oil and gas sector slash emissions by 35% below the 2019 levels. Premier Daniel Smith and the federal Tories say this will devastate our economy. It's not good news. Now, to chat about this in more detail is political columnist with The Sun, Brian Lilley, who joins us once again from Toronto. Brian, no other oil and gas producing nation puts a production cap on their industry. How can the Trudeau government really justify this?
They're bragging about it. It was bizarre yesterday. I was watching Committee Hal, Natural Resources Committee, Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland's there, Jonathan Wilkinson, the Natural Resources Minister is there, and Shannon Stubbs, Alberta MP from Lakeland, asked that very question, and she detailed, OPEC countries don't do this, Norway doesn't do this, the UK doesn't do this, the United States doesn't do this. Can you tell me which country does? And Jonathan Wilkinson laughed at her dismissively. It was arrogance on full display. But earlier, Stephen Guilbeault, the environment minister, bragged, look, we're the only country doing this. This is great. Normally they sit there and they say, well, we have to do this or we have to do that. We have to adopt this policy or we can't trade, which is not actually true. But those are the arguments they make. This time they were bragging that we are the only major oil and gas producing country that's doing this. Now, I'll put it to you. You can believe that climate change is a complete hoax, or you can believe that climate change is an existential threat. Why is it that Canada has not really reduced our emissions, despite the carbon tax, the clean fuel regulations, all these different measures that we've taken, but the Americans and others have, while not having a carbon tax, without penalizing their own economy, their own workers, their own people? Our emissions have stayed relatively the same. Others have been able to bring them down without these draconian measures that hurt consumers, that hurt workers, that hurt the economy. The Trudeau government is just being ideological on this. It is a pure out-and-out attack on Alberta to try and win favor with progressives in Eastern Canada.
Brian, historically speaking, Alberta's had the support of many premiers in their fight against Bill C-69 or the No More Pipelines bill. Now, will other provinces have Alberta's back in this latest fight with Ottawa?
It was remarkable to see every premier, every jurisdiction, New Democrat, Liberal, Conservative, all come together to back Alberta on the fight against Bill C-69. And of course, that is effectively back before the courts again. And I would expect that most, if not all, would back Alberta on that. On this latest one, it's a bit more difficult. It might depend on how Alberta frames it, especially within a court case. Now, Premier Daniel Smith has talked about two things, bringing in a motion from the Sovereignty Act. My colleague Rick Bell at the Calgary Sun asking her about that at her news conference on Monday and what that would look like, but also a court challenge to this. That will take a while. Would depend on how they framed it. Of course, areas like Quebec, there's a certain part of the population that is definitely anti-oil. And you find that to a lesser degree, but still significant in Atlantic Canada. Here in Toronto, it's unfortunately not great, but outside of Toronto, within Ontario, there's a bit more support. So how does the Alberta government, how does Premier Smith frame this? I actually think that she could get some decent support based on, depending on the arguments that she uses, even in places like Quebec. I was looking at a column that she wrote when she was still in the media. It was back in 2021, I think, and she was writing in the Calgary Herald about, pushing back against Yves-François Blanchet, who wanted a green equalization formula to punish Quebec or to punish Alberta and reward Quebec. And she said, be careful what you wish for. If she plays to the jurisdictional issues and the fact that Section 92A of the British North America Act or the Canadian Constitution Act 1867 states that provinces have exclusive jurisdiction over natural resources, she might be able to win some political favor, both from premiers, but also in places like Quebec. That has strong resonance with voters of the Bloc Québécois, voters of the Conservative Party federally, less so with people who vote Liberal. So I think that would be a smart move. You got a new premier in New Brunswick, a Liberal in Susan Holt, not sure where she's going to go. Wab Kinew in Manitoba, new premier, new Democrat, but I actually think he might get on board with this because he can see that there's problems with what the federal government is doing when it comes to jurisdiction.
Brian, isn't a lot of this a moot point? I mean, the emissions cap, you'll see 69 in the fight because the Trudeau government's days are really numbered.
Well, these are regulations, and so they can move to enact them now. And you're seeing this already. Stephen Guilbeault warning the Bloc Québécois and the NDP, hey, don't vote us down, or you're going to be responsible for not reducing emissions. And of course, they, the Bloc didn't start out as a left-wing progressive party, but it is now. And the NDP definitely is. And well, we don't want to be against emissions, even if it means killing off, 150,000 jobs? Remember when the NDP was about blue-collar jobs, when it was about working men and women and protecting their livelihoods? Well, they've all long abandoned that. And so they can do two things with this. One, they can move forward on this without going through Parliament, which isn't functioning now. But they don't need Parliament to do this. They just need to impose regulations. That doesn't require a vote. That's the bureaucrats doing this. Secondly, they are already using this to try and extend the life of this lame duck government. So they're trying to put pressure on the Bloc and the NDP and any progressives. Don't you dare go offside of us, or you're against the planet. Remember, it's always, if you don't agree with Justin Trudeau, you want the planet to burn, as Mark Holland said about your summer road trip.
Brian, it appears as though the new emissions caps don't apply to refineries, which means they won't impact imported oil brought into places like the Irving refineries in New Brunswick. In your opinion, is this just another example of favoritism by the Trudeau Liberals?
It's just like the home heating oil exemption all over again. Well, we've got a bunch of seats in Atlantic Canada. Let's not do anything that can hurt votes there. Let's not do anything that will annoy the Irving family. By the way, they're not as powerful as they used to be. They're still very powerful, but they used to own all the print media in New Brunswick. They don't. They sold it off actually to the parent company where I work, the Toronto Sun and Post Media. So they don't have that leverage anymore, but still a very powerful political family, the Irvings, still an area where the Liberals hope to win jobs. And so, the Irving refinery, which, by the way, they would like, I'm not picking on the Irving family or Irving Oil, they would like to take Alberta oil and even bitumen from the oil sands and refine it and export it. They can't because of the policies of the Trudeau government. But right now, what are they doing? They're bringing in oil from everywhere else. So they can bring in oil from Nigeria, from Saudi Arabia, from the United States, wherever, refine it there, and these same caps will not apply. So, it's mind-boggling that they would do that, but it's par for the course for the Trudeau Liberals, who have one goal in mind, that is retaining power. Look, they're going to lose George Halal's seat in Calgary. There's a good chance they're going to lose Randy Boissonnault. That will go either NDP or it will go Conservative in the next election. They are going to lose whatever little foothold they have in your province. But, at this point, they don't care. They're trying to save the furniture with people in Toronto, in Montreal, and Atlantic Canada.
Brian, Americans are choosing a new president. Now, a recent poll suggests that Canadians think Justin Trudeau is better suited to deal with Kamala Harris if she wins, but also that Pierre Poilievre is better suited to work with Donald Trump. At the end of the day, Brian, neither Trump nor Harris are good for the Canadian economy due to their protectionist approaches when it comes to policy.
Well, that's been my viewpoint for the last several years. In fact, I was looking up a column that I wrote for the 2020 election on Joe Biden. And his protectionism, because back in the 2020 election, everyone was saying, "Oh, Donald Trump's going to be protectionist. We can't support him." Well, Joe Biden got in. He increased softwood lumber duties. He increased the Buy American provisions within the Federal Transit Agency, and that's an agency that will do things like fund bus systems or light rail. But you've got to buy American, and they keep increasing the amount, and that hurts jobs in Canada, whether it's the New Flyer factory in Manitoba or the Alstom train plant in Thunder Bay, Ontario. These are things that hurt the Canadian economy. Now, does it necessarily mean that if there's a Democrat in the White House, having a Liberal in Ottawa helps? Not necessarily. Biden has brought in all kinds of protectionist measures. He tried to wipe out our auto industry again with the Inflation Reduction Act. The critical minerals that are huge up in Northern Ontario and other parts of the north of this country, the Inflation Reduction Act states that they must be sourced or processed in the United States to get all kinds of tax credits. These are protectionist measures all over. And as I already mentioned, softwood lumber and elsewhere, the country of origin labeling for beef and pork producers. Biden goes on, and Trudeau has had very little success in dealing with it. Do I think Poilievre could actually handle Trump? I think so, because Poilievre is going to be looking at this from what helps Canadian jobs, what helps Canadian business, what helps the Canadian economy. And if you remember what Trudeau went into the NAFTA renegotiations with, what were his priorities? Gendered language and climate change. The Americans had all these requirements about getting better access to the Canadian market. We wanted gendered language.
You know, Brian, as the Trudeau government promised to curtail immigration levels, a new report shows that the federal government did not even monitor the impact of temporary foreign workers on the job market or on keeping wages low. What can you tell us?
So this is an internal departmental report where they acknowledge that, yes, they did all these labor market assessments to be able for a firm, let's say the Bridge City News decided, okay, we've got these 4 positions. We can't fill them locally. We need to hire a temporary foreign worker. You need to get what's called a labor market impact assessment. What will the impact of bringing in these foreign workers have on the labor market in Lethbridge? Well, so you do that, and they say yes or no based on the assessment that you get, but then they don't monitor it. And so they approve assessment after assessment after assessment. And then the questions were raised, well, are we looking at what this is doing to the labor pool, to the labor market? Are we looking at what it's doing to wages? And the answer was no. The Prime Minister has already said that in certain sectors, the temporary foreign workers program has suppressed wages. Mike Moffat, an economist who has advised the Trudeau government on many different files, has looked at this program, looked at the impact, and said, this is a wage suppression program. These are not good metrics for any government to have, especially not one that claims to be progressive, looking out for the middle class and those working hard to join it.
Brian, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre says he wants to cut the GST from home prices under $1 million, but the Trudeau government is warning that could take away funding for cities. So let me ask you, who's right here?
They're both right. Pierre Poilievre says, yeah, let's cut the GST for homes under $1 million. And look, if you're in Vancouver or Toronto, that won't get you a big house, but it's on new builds, by the way. It's only on new builds, not on existing homes, because the GST doesn't apply to existing home sales. And this is what the buyer pays at the end, not what the builder pays throughout and gets the claim back. This is a separate act of the GST being applied. And Poilievre says, look, this can save $40,000, $50,000 for an average new buyer in British Columbia or Ontario. This is a really good move, and we should do it. It will make homes cheaper. And by the way, it'll make homes cheaper in Lethbridge. It'll make homes cheaper in Canmore, wherever this is happening. This would work. The question was, well, how will you pay for that? And he said, I'll cut some of these other programs, including the Housing Accelerator Fund. And the Liberals scream, but that's money for cities. Poilievre has been going on social media and pointing to how many millions the Trudeau government has given certain cities and how home starts have actually gone down. So the federal government's giving money for a housing accelerator fund that's supposed to get government, make it easier to build, and it's not happening. The problem with housing, there's many, but the taxation, whether you're talking about the GST on a new home, the development charges, the ancillary fees charged by government, here in Ontario, the estimate is it's about 1/3 of the cost of a home is to taxes. 1/3 how? And I'm sure it's the same in other jurisdictions. That becomes untenable. It makes housing unaffordable. Poilievre, I think, has the right idea of getting government out of the way rather than, as he says, building a bureaucracy to feed another bureaucracy, which doesn't build more homes.
Political columnist with The Sun, Brian Lilley, thanks so much for joining us today from Toronto.
Thank you, Hal.